The February wind cut through downtown Boston like a blade, rattling the windows of the 32nd floor as I sat in Conference Room B, watching my career dissolve before my eyes. The Charles River stretched gray and unforgiving below, matching the expression on Richard Hartwell's face as he delivered what he probably thought was a professional termination. "Sarah, we've decided to restructure the marketing department," he said, his fingers drumming against the mahogany table. The same fingers that had signed my performance reviews, all excellent ratings for the past 3 years. "Your position is being eliminated, effective immediately." I stared at him, my coffee growing cold in the ceramic mug I'd brought from home. The same mug I'd used every morning for 36 months, sitting at my desk overlooking the public garden, building campaigns that had increased our client retention by 40%. The numbers were right there in the quarterly reports, but Richard's eyes wouldn't meet mine. "I don't understand," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. "The Morrison account launch is next week. The pharmaceutical campaign we've been developing for 6 months will be handled by the remaining team," Richard interrupted, sliding a manila envelope across the table. "Everything you need to know is in there. Severance, COBRA information, non-compete agreements." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across his face. I'd known Richard for 5 years, ever since he'd been promoted to marketing director. We'd shared countless late nights perfecting presentations, grabbed coffee during Boston's brutal winters, discussed strategy while walking through the common during lunch breaks. His wife Jennifer had even sent me a Christmas card last year, a photo of them skiing in Vermont, all smiles and matching red scarves. "Is this about the Henderson budget?" I asked, grasping for any logical explanation. "Because I can explain the overrun. This isn't about any specific project, Sarah." Richard's voice carried a note of finality. "It's a business decision. I'm sorry." Sorry. The word hung in the air like smoke from the cigarettes people used to smoke in these meetings decades ago. I gathered my things, a legal pad covered in notes about campaigns I'd never see completed, my favorite pen, the small succulent plant for my desk that had somehow survived 3 New England winters. The elevator ride down felt eternal. Each floor marked another year of my life I'd poured into Hartwell and Associates. The lobby, with its marble floors and the abstract art I'd never understood, seemed foreign now. Maria at the reception desk looked up with confusion as I walked past carrying my cardboard box. "Sarah, are you okay?" she asked in her thick South Boston accent. "Just cleaning out some old files," I lied, forcing a smile. "See you later, Maria." The cold air hit me like a physical blow as I stepped onto Federal Street. The lunch crowd was already forming. Lawyers in expensive coats, financial advisors clutching their phones, the usual symphony of Boston's business district. I stood there for a moment, watching the world continue to spin while mine had just stopped. My phone buzzed. A text from my sister Emma. "Coffee later? Want to hear about the disaster date from last night." I typed back, rain check, rough morning. 3 dots appeared immediately. Emma knew me too well. "Everything okay?" "We'll call you later," I replied, then turned off my phone. The walk to my car felt like a death march. Each step on the cobblestones echoed in my mind, the sound of a career ending, of trust broken, of a future I'd planned crumbling like the old bricks of the buildings around me. I'd parked in the same garage for 3 years, nodding to the same attendant, following the same routine that had given my life structure and purpose. As I drove through the Big Dig tunnel, the radio played some upbeat pop song about new beginnings and fresh starts. I turned it off. The silence was better than the mockery of optimism. Traffic was light for a Tuesday morning. Most people were at work, doing jobs they still had, planning lunches and meetings and futures that extended beyond 9 a.m. I thought about Richard's demeanor during the meeting. The way he'd avoided eye contact, the slight tremor in his voice when he'd said, "business decision." In 3 years of working together, I'd never seen him nervous. He was the type who thrived under pressure, who could pitch to hostile clients and charm them into signing seven-figure contracts. Something wasn't right. The timing was too convenient, too sudden. We were in the middle of our busiest quarter, with 3 major campaigns launching in the next month. Eliminating my position now would create chaos, and Richard hated chaos more than anything. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway in Cambridge. The caller ID showed my colleague Mike's name. "Sarah, what the hell happened?" His voice was tight with disbelief. "Richard just announced in the team meeting that you're pursuing other opportunities." "Are you kidding me?" "I got fired, Mike. This morning. No warning, no explanation beyond restructuring." "That's bullshit. You know that's bullshit, right? The Morrison people specifically requested you for their campaign. Johnson from Pharmaceuticals calls you his marketing genius. This doesn't make sense." "Tell me about it." I sat in my car, watching my neighbor Mrs. Chun tend to her winter garden. Normal people doing normal things on a day that felt anything but normal. "There's something else," Mike said, his voice dropping. "Richard's been acting strange lately. Leaving early, taking long lunches, checking his phone constantly during meetings. And last week—" "What?" "I saw him at Legal Seafoods on Friday afternoon. He was with a woman. Definitely not Jennifer. They were close. Very close. The pieces started forming a picture I didn't want to see." "Mike, you need to be careful what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you what I saw. And I'm telling you that firing our best campaign manager right before our biggest quarter doesn't make business sense unless there's something else going on." After Mike hung up, I sat in my driveway staring at the modest colonial I'd bought 2 years ago. The mortgage I'd qualified for based on my salary at Hartwell and Associates. The salary I no longer had. The life I'd built that was already starting to feel like a house of cards in a Massachusetts windstorm. The afternoon stretched ahead of me like an empty canvas. For the first time in 3 years, I had nowhere to be at 1 p.m., no meetings to attend, no deadlines to meet. The freedom felt more like falling than flying. I thought about Richard's face during the meeting, the way he'd shuffled the papers, the slight flush on his neck when he'd mentioned business decisions. And I thought about Mike's observation, Richard leaving early, the mysterious lunches, the woman at Legal Seafoods. In my kitchen, I made a pot of coffee and sat at my small table overlooking the backyard. The bare trees swayed in the wind, their branches reaching toward a gray sky that promised more snow. I opened my laptop and began drafting a response to the severance package, reading through the non-compete clause that would prevent me from working for any competing agency for 12 months. 12 months. In Boston's marketing scene, that was career suicide. As I read through the legal language, one phrase caught my attention: employee termination due to performance issues. Performance issues. My last 3 reviews had been exemplary. I'd brought in 2 major accounts in the past year alone. The phrase was buried in the middle of a paragraph. Easy to miss unless you were looking for it. They weren't just firing me. They were setting up a narrative that would make me unemployable. A narrative that would protect Richard if anyone asked questions about why he'd eliminated his top performer during the company's busiest season. I closed the laptop and walked to my window. The afternoon light was already fading. February in Massachusetts was unforgiving that way. Somewhere across the city, Richard was probably sitting in his office, maybe thinking about his lunch plans, maybe texting someone who wasn't his wife. The thought crystallized into something harder, more focused. If Richard was playing games with my career, my reputation, my future, then maybe it was time to learn the rules of the game he'd started. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Detective Ray Murphy's number. Ray was Emma's ex-boyfriend, a decent guy who'd remained friends with our family even after their relationship ended. We'd talked at Emma's birthday party last month about his work with the Boston PD, How much had changed since he'd started 15 years ago? Ray? It's Sarah, Emma's sister. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Sure, Sarah. What's going on? If someone wanted to hire a private investigator in Boston, hypothetically, what would you recommend? There was a pause. This wouldn't have anything to do with why you're calling from home at 1 p.m. on a Tuesday, would it? Maybe. Give me an hour. I'll call you back with a name. The die was cast. As I waited for Ray's call, I made a second pot of coffee and started planning the first move in a game I'd never wanted to play. But if Richard Hartwell thought he could destroy my career to cover up whatever he was hiding, he was about to learn that some people fight back. The phone rang at exactly 2:15 p.m. Ray's contact was a woman named Patricia Vance, a former Boston PD detective who'd gone private 5 years ago. Her office was in a converted brownstone in Back Bay, the kind of building that had probably housed wealthy merchants in the 1800s and now contained lawyers, accountants, and apparently private investigators. Your friend Murphy speaks highly of you, Patricia said as she poured coffee from a thermos. She was probably in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of direct gaze that made you want to confess things you hadn't even done. He also mentioned you got terminated this morning under suspicious circumstances. I explained the situation, the sudden firing, the performance narrative in the severance package, Mike's observations about Richard's behavior. Patricia listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in a leather-bound notebook. So, you suspect your former boss is having an affair, and you think he fired you to cover it up somehow? She asked when I finished. I think he fired me because he's planning something that requires my position to be eliminated. And I think his recent behavior suggests he's compromised in some way. Those are two different investigations, Sarah. One is personal, following someone around, documenting infidelity. The other is professional, looking into corporate malfeasance, fraud, that sort of thing. Which one are you hiring me for? I considered the question. Both. If Richard is having an affair, it suggests he's capable of deception. If he's capable of deceiving his wife, he's capable of deceiving his business partners. I want to know what he's hiding. Patricia quoted her daily rate, more than I had expected, but less than the severance package would cover. I'll need a retainer, and I'll need you to understand that this might not go the way you want it to. Sometimes the truth is messier than the lie. I understand. Do you? Because in my experience, people who hire me to investigate their bosses usually discover things they wish they hadn't. Corporate fraud, embezzlement, personal information that can't be unknown once it's known. Are you prepared for that? I thought about my empty office, the campaigns I'd never finish, the mortgage payment due in 3 weeks. I'm prepared. Patricia opened a filing cabinet and pulled out a contract. I'll start with basic surveillance. His routine, his contacts, his activities outside of work. If there's an affair, I'll document it. If there's something else, I'll find that too. How long will it take? Depends on how careful he is. A sloppy cheater? Maybe a week. Someone who's been at it for months and knows how to cover his tracks? Could be longer. I signed the contract and wrote a check for the retainer. Patricia tucked both into her desk drawer with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. One more thing, she said as I stood to leave. Don't do anything that might alert him to what you're doing. No confrontations, no fishing for information from mutual contacts. No changes to your routine that might seem suspicious. If he's smart enough to fire you to cover up something else, he's smart enough to notice if you're watching him. The advice felt like a warning and a challenge. I'd spent 3 years working closely with Richard, learning his habits, his tells, his weaknesses. Now I was supposed to pretend none of that knowledge existed while someone else used it to expose him. I drove home through the afternoon traffic, the radio playing news about a storm system moving in from the west. Snow was predicted for the weekend. Another reminder that winter in Massachusetts was far from over. At a red light near Harvard Square, I found myself staring at the pedestrians crossing the street. College students bundled in parkas, professionals hurrying between meetings, ordinary people living ordinary lives. 24 hours ago, I'd been one of them. Now I was sitting in my car, having just hired a private investigator to spy on my former boss. The transformation felt surreal, like waking up in someone else's life. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. Emma's name appeared on the screen. "Okay, spill it," she said without preamble. "Ray called me. He's worried about you." Ray worries about everyone. It's his nature. "Sarah, he said you asked him about private investigators. What the hell happened at work today?" I told her about the firing, the suspicious circumstances, the decision to hire Patricia. Emma listened with a kind of silence that meant she was processing, not just waiting for her turn to talk. "So, let me get this straight," she said finally. "You got fired this morning, and instead of updating your resume or calling headhunters, you hired a PI to investigate your boss." When you put it like that, it sounds crazy. It doesn't sound crazy. It sounds like you. Remember when we were kids and Tommy Morrison said you cheated on the science fair? You spent 2 weeks proving he was the one who copied from the encyclopedia. This is a little different than 4th grade science fair drama. Is it? Someone accused you of something unfair, and you're fighting back. That's who you are, Sarah. I just want to make sure you're prepared for what you might find. After Emma hung up, I sat in my kitchen and made a list of everything I knew about Richard's routine. He arrived at work around 8 a.m., usually with a large coffee from the Starbucks on the corner. He took lunch most days between 12:30 and 1:30, often with clients or potential clients. He left the office by 6 p.m. unless there was a crisis, and he lived in Newton with Jennifer and their 2 kids. But Mike had mentioned recent changes, the early departures, the long lunches, the constant phone checking. And there was the woman at Legal Seafoods, the one who definitely wasn't Jennifer. I pulled up Google Maps and started marking locations. Richard's office, his home, the restaurants he frequented, the gym where he had a membership. If Patricia was going to follow him, she'd need to know his patterns. And if I was going to pay her daily rate, I wanted to make sure she had every advantage. The exercise felt methodical, almost scientific, like building a marketing campaign, but instead of targeting consumers, I was targeting the truth about the man who destroyed my career. Each location I marked felt like a small victory, a piece of intelligence that might prove useful. As I worked, I thought about the conversation with Patricia, her warning about discovering things I might not want to know. In my experience, the truth was usually better than uncertainty, even when it was painful. But this felt different. This was personal in a way that professional disappointment couldn't be. At 7 p.m., I made dinner and turned on the news. The storm was still tracking toward Massachusetts, expected to arrive Sunday night. The meteorologist promised 6 to 8 inches of snow, with temperatures dropping into the teens. I found myself wondering if Patricia would be able to follow Richard if the weather turned bad. The thought surprised me. Less than 12 hours ago, I'd been a marketing manager with a steady job and a clear future. Now I was worrying about weather conditions affecting surveillance operations. The speed of the transformation was dizzying. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Patricia Vance. Beginning surveillance tomorrow morning. We'll update you every 48 hours unless something significant develops sooner. I typed back, understood. Thank you. As I prepared for bed, I realized this was the first day in 3 years that I hadn't checked my work email before sleeping. The absence felt strange, like missing a limb. I'd built my identity around being the person who stayed late, who checked messages after hours, who was always available for the next crisis or opportunity. Now I was the person who hired private investigators, the person who fought back when powerful people tried to destroy her, the person who refused to accept business decision as an explanation for losing everything she'd worked for. The change felt dangerous and exhilarating at the same time. As I lay in bed, listening to the wind rattle my windows, I wondered what Patricia would discover about Richard's secret life. and I wondered what I would discover about my own capacity for revenge. The investigation was just beginning, but I already felt different. Focused, determined, ready for whatever truth was waiting to be uncovered. Tomorrow, Patricia would start following Richard, and I would start learning what it felt like to be the hunter instead of the hunted. Patricia's first update came at 10 a.m. on Thursday, exactly 48 hours after she'd started surveillance. I was sitting in my kitchen, supposedly working on job applications, but actually obsessing over every detail of Richard's possible deception. "Your former boss is a creature of habit," Patricia said when I answered the phone. "Same coffee shop, same parking spot, same routine. But you were right about the changes." "What kind of changes?" "Yesterday, he left the office at 11:45 a.m. and drove to the Marriott on Boylston Street. He met a woman in the lobby, blonde, mid-30s professional attire. They went upstairs together and didn't come down for 2 hours." My stomach tightened. "Did you get photos?" "I got everything. The meeting, the elevator, him leaving the hotel at 2:15 p.m. And Sarah, the woman, isn't random. She works for Morrison Pharmaceuticals." Morrison Pharmaceuticals. The account I'd been managing, the campaign launch that was supposed to happen next week. The client who had specifically requested me for their marketing strategy. "Are you sure?" I asked, though I already knew Patricia wouldn't make that kind of mistake. "Positive." I followed her back to the Morrison building after Richard left. She badged in through the main entrance. I ran her license plate. Her name is Amanda Chin. She's a marketing director at Morrison. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Richard wasn't just having an affair. He was having an affair with a client whose account generated nearly 30% of our agency's revenue, a client who had specifically requested me to lead their campaign, and who would now be working directly with Richard instead. "There's more," Patricia continued. "This morning I followed him to the same coffee shop, but instead of going straight to work, he made a detour. He stopped at a jewelry store in Copley Place, Tiffany & Company. He was inside for 20 minutes. What did he buy?" I couldn't see the purchase, but I have photos of him entering and leaving the store. And I have the receipt. "How did you get the receipt?" "Trade secret. But I can tell you he spent $3,400 on a tennis bracelet. The kind of gift a married man doesn't buy for his wife in the middle of February." I felt the familiar rage building in my chest, the same fury I'd experienced during the termination meeting. But this time it was accompanied by something else, a cold, calculating satisfaction. Richard had made a mistake. He'd underestimated me, and now he was going to pay for it. "Patricia, I need you to get me everything. Photos, receipts, a timeline of every meeting, every gift, every lie. I want documentation that would hold up in court." "Planning to sue him?" "I'm planning to destroy him." There was a pause on the line. "Sarah, I've been doing this for 15 years. I've seen what happens when people get consumed by revenge. It changes them. Are you sure this is the path you want to take?" He fired me to cover up his affair with a client. He's probably stealing the account I built, giving it to his mistress instead of fighting for me. He destroyed my career to protect his own interests. So yes, I'm sure. All right, I'll continue surveillance. But I want you to think about what your endgame looks like. Having evidence is one thing. Using it is another. After Patricia hung up, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the half-written job application on my laptop screen. The position was for a marketing coordinator at a small firm in Cambridge, a significant step down from my role at Hartwell and Associates, with a salary that would barely cover my mortgage. But now I understood why Richard had fired me. It wasn't about restructuring or performance issues. It was about removing the one person who knew the Morrison account well enough to notice irregularities. With me gone, he could work directly with Amanda Chen without anyone questioning their relationship or the decisions they made together. I closed the laptop and called Mike. "Sarah, how are you holding up?" he asked. The office has been chaos since you left. Richard's trying to handle the Morrison launch himself, and it's not going well. What kind of problems? Everything. The creative brief you wrote doesn't match what Morrison is asking for now. The media buy is completely different. It's like they changed their entire strategy overnight. Have you met with the Morrison team lately? No, Richard's handling all client contact directly now. He says it's more efficient, but it's weird. You spent months building relationships with their team, and now, suddenly we're locked out. Mike, I need you to do something for me. Can you access the Morrison files? Probably. Why? I want to see the current project timeline, the budget, the creative brief. Can you email them to me? There was a pause. Sarah, I could get fired for that. If Richard found out, he won't find out. And Mike, I think you might want to start updating your resume. If what I suspect is true, Hartwell and Associates is about to have some serious problems. Mike agreed to send me the files, and I spent the rest of the afternoon analyzing them. The changes were subtle but significant. The budget had been restructured to favor digital media over traditional advertising, a strategy that happened to benefit Morrison's internal digital marketing team. The creative brief emphasized partnership and collaboration between agencies, language that was unusual for external campaigns. It looked like Richard and Amanda were planning to bring more of the Morrison work in-house, cutting Hartwell and Associates out of the lucrative parts of the account. The affair wasn't just personal, it was a business strategy that would benefit both of them while destroying the agency that had employed me. At 5 p.m., Patricia called again. I'm sending you photos from today, she said. Richard met Amanda at the Four Seasons for lunch. They were intimate, very intimate, and afterward they went to her apartment in the South End. How intimate! Holding hands, kissing, the kind of behavior that makes it clear they're sleeping together. And Sarah, they weren't being careful. They're acting like a couple who thinks they're invisible. Are you sure no one saw them? A few people. The hostess at the Four Seasons definitely noticed. A neighbor in Amanda's building saw them entering together. If someone wanted to confirm their relationship, it wouldn't be hard. Send me everything. Photos, addresses, times, witnesses. I want it all. I'll email you within the hour. But Sarah, I have to ask, what are you planning to do with this information? I thought about the question. What was I planning to do? 12 hours ago, I might have said I wanted justice or accountability or simply to clear my name. But now, with evidence of Richard's deception mounting, I wanted something more primitive. I wanted him to feel the same shock and helplessness I'd felt in that conference room. I'm going to give him a choice, I said finally. He can tell the truth about why he fired me, or I can tell the truth about what he's been doing with Amanda Chin. And if he doesn't cooperate, then I'll send the photos to his wife, and to the managing partners at Hartwell and Associates, and to the ethics board at Morrison Pharmaceuticals, and to anyone else who might be interested in knowing how Richard Hartwell conducts business. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. That's a scorched earth approach, Sarah. Are you prepared for the consequences? He made his choice when he fired me. Now I'm making mine. After we hung up, I poured a glass of wine and sat in my living room, watching the snow begin to fall outside. The storm had arrived earlier than predicted, and fat flakes were already accumulating on the sidewalk. By tomorrow, the city would be transformed into something clean and white, all the dirt and grime of winter covered by a fresh layer of snow. I thought about transformation, how quickly things could change, how completely a life could be altered by a single decision. 48 hours ago, I'd been a marketing manager with a successful career and a clear future. Now I was unemployed, armed with evidence of my former boss's affair, and planning a revenge that would destroy multiple lives. The woman in the conference room who had accepted Richard's explanation and walked away quietly was gone. In her place was someone harder, more calculating, more willing to fight dirty. The change scared me and thrilled me in equal measure. My phone buzzed with an email from Patricia. The subject line read, "Surveillance Report Day 2." I opened it and found a dozen photos of Richard and Amanda together. The images were damning, clear evidence of an intimate relationship that violated every professional boundary. In one photo, they were kissing outside the Four Seasons. In another, Richard was helping Amanda into his car, his hand on her lower back in a gesture that was unmistakably romantic. The final image showed them entering Amanda's apartment building, Richard's arm around her waist. I studied Richard's face in the photos. He looked relaxed, happy, younger than he had in the office. This wasn't a man struggling with guilt or conflict. This was a man who had found a way to have everything he wanted: the affair, the business advantage, the elimination of anyone who might threaten his carefully constructed deception. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated the woman he'd fired. He'd assumed I would disappear quietly, accept his lies, and move on with my life. He'd never considered that I might fight back. Tomorrow was Friday. The Morrison campaign launch was scheduled for Monday. Richard would be expecting a quiet weekend, probably planning to spend time with Amanda while Jennifer thought he was working late on the campaign. Instead, he was going to get the shock of his life. I pulled out my phone and typed a message. "Richard, we need to talk. I'll be at Legal Seafoods on Boylston Street at 3 p.m. tomorrow. Come alone." I stared at the message for a full minute before sending it. Once I pressed send, there would be no going back. The confrontation would happen, and one of us would walk away destroyed. I pressed send. The game was about to begin. Friday morning brought 6 inches of fresh snow and a text from Richard. "I don't think we have anything to discuss. Please direct any questions to HR." I replied immediately, "We can discuss Amanda Chun in person, or I can discuss her with Jennifer. Your choice." The response came within 30 seconds. "Legal Seafoods, 3 p.m. I spent the morning preparing for the confrontation like a general planning a battle. I printed copies of all the photos Patricia had taken, organized them chronologically, and prepared a timeline of Richard's deception. I also drafted 3 letters, one to Jennifer Hartwell, one to the managing partners at Hartwell & Associates, and one to the Morrison Pharmaceuticals Ethics Board. At 2:30 p.m., I drove through the snowy streets of Boston toward the restaurant. The lunch crowd was thinning out, and I easily found a table in the back corner where we could talk privately. Legal Seafoods was an ironic choice, the same restaurant where Mike had first spotted Richard with Amanda, the beginning of the evidence trail that would now destroy him. Richard arrived at exactly 3 p.m., his coat dusted with snow and his face grim. He looked older than he had on Tuesday morning, the stress of maintaining his lies finally showing in the lines around his eyes. "Sarah," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "I hope you understand how inappropriate this is." "Inappropriate?" I laughed, pulling out the manila envelope containing the photos. "Let's talk about inappropriate, Richard." I slid the first photo across the table, Richard and Amanda kissing outside the Four Seasons. His face went white, then red, then white again. "Where did you get this?" "Does it matter? The question is what you're going to do about it." I laid out the rest of the photos methodically, watching Richard's composure crumble with each image. The jewelry store receipt came last, along with Patricia's report documenting his afternoon visits to Amanda's apartment. "You fired me to cover up your affair with a client," I said when he'd seen everything. "You eliminated my position because you knew I'd noticed the irregularities in the Morrison account. You destroyed my career to protect your own interests." Richard was quiet for a long moment, studying the photos like they were exhibits in a trial, which in a way they were. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "I want the truth. I want you to call the managing partners and tell them you made a mistake. I want my job back, with full back pay and a formal apology. And I want Amanda Chin removed from the Morrison account. You're asking me to destroy my marriage, my career, everything I've built. You should have thought of that before you decided to destroy mine." Richard picked up one of the photos, the image of him and Amanda entering her apartment building. How long have you known? Since Tuesday afternoon. I hired a private investigator the same day you fired me. Patricia Vance, he said, surprising me. I saw her car yesterday. I thought someone might be following me. If you knew you were being watched, why didn't you stop? Because I couldn't. He looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd known him, Richard Hartwell looked vulnerable. I've been having an affair with Amanda for 3 months. It started as a business relationship, but it became something else. She's everything Jennifer isn't. Young, ambitious, exciting. Being with her makes me feel alive again. So you fired me to keep your secret. I fired you because you're too smart. You would have figured out that Amanda was influencing the Morrison account strategy. You would have questioned why she suddenly had so much input into campaigns you'd been managing for months. You're right. I would have. And then you would have investigated, just like you did after I fired you. You would have discovered the affair, and you would have used it against me. Also right. Richard leaned back in the booth, looking defeated. So what happens now? You send the photos to Jennifer? To the partners? That depends on you. I told you what I want. My job back, full back pay, a formal apology, and Amanda removed from the Morrison account. Give me those things, and the photos stay private. And if I don't? I pulled out my phone and showed him the draft email I'd prepared. Then, at 5 p.m. today, these photos get sent to Jennifer, the managing partners, and the Morrison Ethics Board. Your marriage ends, your career ends, and Amanda's career probably ends too. Richard stared at the phone screen. You're willing to destroy an innocent woman's life for revenge. Amanda isn't innocent. She's a marketing director who's been manipulating a client relationship for personal gain. She's as complicit as you are. And Jennifer? My kids? They're innocent. You should have thought about them before you started sleeping with a client. We sat in silence for several minutes. Around us, the restaurant buzzed with normal conversation. People discussing weekend plans, business deals, ordinary life. None of them knew they were witnessing the destruction of a man's carefully constructed lies. I can't give you what you want, Richard said finally. Even if I wanted to, I can't. The managing partners would want to know why I'm suddenly reversing a termination decision. They'd investigate, and they'd discover the affair anyway. Then you've made your choice. Wait. Richard held up his hand. There's another option. What if I resign? What if I leave the company and you come back to manage the Morrison account properly? You'd do that. I'd do that to protect my family, to protect Amanda, to minimize the damage. I considered the offer. It would give me back my career, my reputation, my future. But it would also let Richard escape the consequences of his actions. He'd lose his job, but he'd keep his marriage, his reputation, his ability to start over somewhere else. Not enough, I said. You don't get to resign quietly and start fresh. You need to face the consequences of what you've done. Then you're going to send the photos. I'm going to send the photos. Richard closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Sarah, I'm asking you to reconsider. Not for me, but for Jennifer and the kids. They don't deserve to have their lives destroyed because of my mistakes. You're right. They don't deserve it, but you made the choice to put them in this position. You decided your affair was more important than their stability. You decided your career was more important than my career. You created this situation, and now you have to live with the consequences. I stood up, gathering the photos and putting them back in the envelope. You have until 5 p.m. to decide. Either you call the managing partners and tell them the truth about why you fired me, or I send these photos to everyone who should know what kind of man you really are. Sarah, please. 5 p.m., Richard. Not a minute later. I walked out of the restaurant into the snowy afternoon, leaving Richard sitting alone with the weight of his choices. The cold air felt cleaner than the stale atmosphere inside, and I breathed deeply as I walked to my car. For the first time in 4 days, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny. The drive home took longer than usual because of the snow, giving me time to think about what would happen next. If Richard called the managing partners, he'd have to explain why he'd fabricated performance issues to justify my termination. He'd have to admit to the affair with Amanda, the conflict of interest, the manipulation of the Morrison account. His career would be over, but at least he'd have told the truth. If he didn't call, the photos would speak for themselves. Jennifer would discover her husband's betrayal. The managing partners would see evidence of professional misconduct. The Morrison Ethics Board would investigate the relationship between their marketing director and their agency contact. The destruction would be complete and public. At 4:45 p.m., I sat in my kitchen with my laptop open, the email addresses loaded, the photos attached. My finger hovered over the send button as I watched the clock on my screen tick toward 5 p.m. 4:58 p.m. My phone rang. "Sarah, it's Richard. I just finished calling the managing partners. I told them everything. The affair, the conflict of interest, the real reason I fired you. They're meeting with me on Monday morning, and they want to meet with you on Tuesday." "What did you tell them exactly?" "That I terminated your employment to cover up a personal relationship that was affecting business decisions. That you were an exemplary employee who was fired for reasons unrelated to performance. That the company owes you an apology and compensation for the damage to your career." "And Amanda?" "She's being removed from the Morrison account immediately. Morrison will be informed that there was a conflict of interest that has been resolved." I felt a surge of satisfaction mixed with something that might have been regret. "What about Jennifer?" "I'm going to tell her tonight. She deserves to hear it from me, not from photographs." "And your job?" "I'll be lucky if they let me resign instead of firing me. But that's my problem, not yours." After Richard hung up, I sat staring at the unsent email on my screen. The photos were still there, ready to be unleashed if needed. But for the first time since Tuesday morning, I felt like justice might be possible without total destruction. At 6 p.m., Emma called. "Ray told me you hired Patricia Vance," she said. "He's worried you're going to do something you'll regret." "I already did it, and I don't regret it." "What happened?" I told her about the investigation, the photos, the confrontation with Richard. Emma listened without interrupting, a skill she developed over years of being my sister. "So he's going to confess everything?" she asked when I finished. "He already has. The managing partners want to meet with me on Tuesday. And the photos are staying private as long as he keeps his word." "You could have destroyed him completely." "I could have. But destroying him wouldn't have given me back my career. It would have just made me the kind of person who destroys lives for revenge." "When did you get so wise?" "About an hour ago." Emma laughed. "So what happens now?" "Now I wait to see if the managing partners offer me my job back. If they do, I'll probably take it. If they don't, I'll have to decide whether to use the photos or move on with my life. And if Richard doesn't follow through on his promises, then he'll discover what happens when you underestimate someone who's willing to fight back." That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in months. I relaxed. I read books, watched movies, took long walks through the snowy streets of Cambridge. I didn't check my work email because I didn't have work email to check. I didn't worry about deadlines or campaigns or client meetings. For the first time in 3 years, I remembered what it felt like to have a life outside of work. On Monday morning, I got a call from Michael Harrison, one of the managing partners at Hartwell and Associates. "Sarah, I want to apologize on behalf of the firm for the way your termination was handled. We've completed our investigation into the circumstances, and we'd like to offer you reinstatement with full back pay and a formal apology." "What about Richard?" "Richard has submitted his resignation. We've accepted it, effective immediately. And the Morrison account?" will be transferred back to you if you're willing to take it on. We understand if you'd prefer to work on other accounts, given the circumstances. I thought about Amanda Chin, about the awkwardness of working with someone who'd been sleeping with my former boss. But I also thought about the months of work I'd put into the Morrison campaigns, the relationships I'd built, the success I'd helped create. I'll take it, I said, on one condition. What's that? I want a promotion, senior marketing manager, with the salary and benefits that come with it. Done. On Tuesday morning, I walked back into the offices of Hartwell and Associates for the first time in a week. My desk had been cleaned out, but Maria at reception had saved my personal items in a box. The small succulent plant was still alive, somehow surviving a week without water or sunlight. Mike greeted me with a cup of coffee and a huge grin. Welcome back, boss. Ready to fix the Morrison mess? Ready, I said, settling into my chair and turning on my computer. Let's get to work. The Morrison campaign launch happened on schedule, with me back in my rightful role as account manager. Amanda Chun had been reassigned to internal projects, and our interactions were limited to brief, professional exchanges. She never mentioned Richard, and I never mentioned the photos. 3 weeks later, I got a text from Patricia Vance. Saw the news about your promotion in the Business Journal. Congratulations. You chose the right path. I typed back, thank you, for everything. Any regrets about not using the photos? I thought about the question. Richard had lost his job and, presumably, his marriage. Amanda had lost her influence and her lover. I had gained back my career and my reputation. The truth had been told, consequences had been faced, and justice had been served without anyone being completely destroyed. No regrets, I replied. Sometimes the thread of truth is more powerful than the truth itself. Wise words. Call me if you ever need anything else. I deleted the photos from my phone and computer that night, along with Patricia's reports and the timeline I'd created. The evidence had served its purpose, and now it was time to let it go. 6 months later, I was promoted to marketing director. The Morrison account had grown by 40% under my leadership, and I'd brought in 3 new major clients. I'd also started dating again, an architect named David who made me laugh and never asked about my work drama. I never saw Richard again, though I heard through industry contacts that he'd taken a position with a smaller firm in Hartford. I hoped he'd learned something from the experience, but I didn't spend much time wondering about it. The lesson I learned from those 4 days in February was simple. Sometimes the best revenge is not revenge at all. Sometimes the best revenge is refusing to let someone else's choices define your future. Sometimes the best revenge is building something better from the ashes of what was destroyed. As I sat in my new office one snowy February morning exactly a year later, I thought about the woman who'd been fired in Conference Room B. She'd been shocked, hurt, and desperate. She'd also been underestimated by a man who thought he could control the narrative of his own deception. He'd been wrong about that, and I'd been right to fight back. But more importantly, I'd been right to know when to stop fighting and start building again. The phone rang, a new client, a new campaign, a new opportunity to prove that truth, persistence, and strategic thinking could overcome even the most carefully constructed lies. I answered the call and got back to work.